European foreign and defence ministers have agreed on 17 new projects for developing an EU army. And despite the fact that the UK is already getting, of course, to leave the European Union, it seems nonetheless London's still very interested in its affairs, including defence. RT's Polly Boyke gives us the details.
Well, he's definitely rubbished the idea. In fact, he appears to be following in the footsteps of the US President Donald Trump, who last week tweeted that Parisians were learning German or preparing to learn German until the Americans came and saved them from occupation during World War II. So he didn't take well to the idea of a European army either. Gavin Williamson, similarly forceful in his wording. He said, he's told a UK newspaper that an EU army certainly won't be happening on his watch. Take a listen.
It is an absolutely crazy idea. NATO's delivered European security for the last 70 years, and we should feel very proud of it. Should we undermine that by forming a separate military force? Absolutely not. You can absolutely rest assured that Britain will never become part of a European army on my watch.
Well, some might question Gavin Williamson having an opinion at all on any future EU endeavours, given that the UK isn't planning to be part of them. They are leaving the European Union. Nevertheless, the idea for an EU army has been floated in the past by several leaders, but it's always kind of been a taboo subject. But all that changed last week when Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron both expressed their support for the idea as part of the World War I centenary commemorations. Take a listen to what each of the leaders had to say.
We need to show that Europe is moving forward on socio-economic issues, reinforcing the Eurozone, tax system for the digital sector, our investment policy in innovation and artificial intelligence, a common defense and security, of course, for which we have laid the foundations.
Where one has to say that either we manage together to find global solutions step by step, sometimes too slowly, or we don't. It also concerns the question of the defence of Europe and the question of a long-term and codified European army.
Well, the message coming from the UK Defence Secretary today is that France and Germany already belong to one military alliance, along with the UK, the US and a swathe of other countries, remember? NATO. And Gavin Williamson's point is that France and Germany should be aiming to meet their 2% GDP target of defence spending on NATO before they start thinking about forming any alternative armies. Now, France at the moment spends about 1.8% GDP on defence, and Germany spends about 1.2%. And the EU is very much part of NATO. In fact, just today, the EU's top diplomat, Federica Mogherini, she met with the Secretary-General of NATO in Brussels and reaffirmed how important the military alliance is. Take a listen.
Cooperation with NATO that is strengthening. I will be pleased to welcome Secretary-General Stoltenberg again this morning with us. Our cooperation with NATO is as strong as ever.
So disagreement over an EU army, maybe, but there is one thing that all these countries agree on. The US, the EU, the UK as part of it still, all agree on the need to defend themselves against Russia. Macron said it when making this EU army proposal, and NATO officials repeat it like a mantra, that there is growing Russian military activity and they need to be able to counter it.
I spoke to political analyst Chris Banbury about it. He told me that Gavin Williamson doesn't want the UK to be left out in the cold by the US, basically.
Britain wants to keep NATO as the sole game in town because of its links to the United States. That's why the United States wants to keep NATO, and they don't want this European army. So Britain does not want something else rivaling that. But I don't think there's any really serious commitment to creating, if you like, a sort of rival to NATO. As I say, it would involve a huge amount of defence spending. The other reason why Britain is backing America, of course, is that Britain and actually France were the two European countries which had a relative military weight, unlike Germany, and intervened in Afghanistan, Iraq, and goodness knows where else. Britain wants to keep that and doesn't want to see itself being frozen out, which it would be if this went ahead. The strange thing here, of course, is one of the destabilising factors in Europe has been the expansion of NATO itself into Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. That has led to deep worries in Moscow about this process, and a feeling that the Americans and NATO have reneged on promises made at the time of when the Soviet Union collapsed to Mikhail Gorbachev. And it's strange that, the NATO expansion, as I say, has destabilised the situation in Europe. And now we have this other idea that added to this, there should be another European army.